The Tickling of the Dragon's Tail.
I don't
On
know
May
why it didn't
21st,
start, bro. I'm sitting here, I'm pressing my space bar and it's
1946,
just
physicist
ignoring.
Louis Slotin stood in a laboratory at Los Alamos, New Mexico,
So
demonstrating what his colleagues
the tickling of the dragon's tail.
had nicknamed Tickling the Dragon's Tail. The experiment involved bringing two beryllium-coated hemispheres of plutonium dangerously close to each other. This assembly, known as the Demon Core, had already killed one scientist. Slotin was using only a screwdriver to
Oh yeah, and it just barely slips and just ding, and it like shoots radiation all
keep the
around or some
hemispheres
shit.
apart. 7 colleagues watched from nearby.
Think I've
Slotin had
heard about
performed this
this.
test before, always by hand, always with a screwdriver. He knew the risk. The moment the hemispheres touched, they would go critical, releasing a burst of deadly radiation. But Slotin was confident, his movements careful and practiced. Then the screwdriver slipped. The hemispheres came together. A blue flash erupted from the core, filling the room with harsh light. Slotin felt a sour taste flood his mouth instantly. He knew immediately what had happened. Without hesitation, he tore the hemispheres apart with his bare hands, stopping the reaction. His colleagues would survive. He would not. Within seconds, nausea hit him. He walked outside and vomited. Medical staff arrived quickly, but there was nothing they could do. Slotin had absorbed over 1,000 rads of radiation. A fatal dose. The countdown had begun. Over the next 9 days, his body began to break down. The radiation destroyed cells faster than they could regenerate. His white blood cell count plummeted. He developed painful blisters across his hands where he had touched the core. His skin began to peel away in sheets. Internal bleeding started as his intestinal lining deteriorated. By day 3, he was in constant agony. His hands swelled grotesquely, the tissue necrotizing from within. He lost weight rapidly as his digestive system failed. Doctors tried blood transfusions, but his bone marrow could no longer produce new cells. The radiation had shattered his DNA, making recovery impossible. His organs shut down one by one. His heart struggled to pump, his lungs filled with fluid. The pain became unbearable, requiring constant morphine. On May 30th, 9 days after the blue flash, Louis Slotin died. His body had been destroyed from the inside out, cell by cell, by forces invisible to the human eye. The delayed toxin.
Damn. I just want to say, I think that the name they used for that, the tickling of the dragon's tail, is kind of funny. But yeah, it's sad that he died. Rest in peace, bro.
Cell by
GG's.
cell,
It's just my mouse just ain't moving.
by
bro.
forces
My
invisible to the
computer's
human
just
eye.
tweaking.
The delayed toxin. Karen Wetterhahn was one of the world's leading experts on toxic metal poisoning. At Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, the 48-year-old chemist had spent decades researching how heavy metals damage the human body. On August 14, 1996, she was studying the effects of mercury on DNA repair mechanisms. She was working with dimethylmercury, a compound so poisonous that a single drop could be lethal. Wetterhahn knew the danger. She wore latex gloves and worked carefully under a fume hood. Then 1 or 2 drops landed on her gloved hand. She followed protocol immediately, removing the gloves and washing thoroughly. The latex should have provided protection. She felt no concern. The compound had barely touched her for seconds before she cleaned it away. She continued her work, unaware that dimethylmercury.
Yeah, bro. I've heard about this shit. It went straight through the glove and into her hand.
Had already
bro.
penetrated the glove and absorbed through her skin. Months passed. Wetterhahn felt perfectly healthy. She taught classes, conducted research, spent time with her family. By January, 5 months after the spill, nothing seemed wrong. Then she began stumbling over her words during lectures. Her speech became slurred, confused. She lost her balance walking across campus. Within weeks, the symptoms accelerated. She could no longer walk without assistance. Her vision blurred, then darkened. She lost the ability to hear clearly. Her hands stopped responding to commands from her brain. Doctors performed tests and discovered the mercury had crossed into her central nervous system, destroying neurons throughout her brain. The mercury had been waiting, accumulating silently in her blood before crossing the blood-brain barrier. Now it was systematically dismantling her nervous system. Her motor control vanished. She could not speak, could not move, could not recognize her own family. Brain scans showed extensive damage spreading through the tissue. By February, she had slipped into a coma. Her brain continued deteriorating, the mercury destroying more connections each day. There was no treatment, no way to remove the poison that had been killing her for months without her knowledge. On June 8, 1997, 10 months after 2 drops touched her glove, Karen Wetterhahn died. The toxin she had spent her career studying had been inside her the entire time. The fatal globe of fire. On August 6, 1753, physicist Georg Wilhelm Richmann was attempting to replicate Benjamin Franklin's famous electrical experiments. From his home in St. Petersburg, Russia, the 42-year-old had built an apparatus designed to attract and measure lightning. That afternoon, dark clouds gathered over the city, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Richmann saw his opportunity. He had constructed a metal rod that extended through the roof of his house, connected to an iron bar suspended from silk threads inside his study. Beneath the bar hung a metal pointer that would move across a graduated scale when electricity flowed through the system. Unlike Franklin's setup, Richmond's apparatus had no ground wire. All the electrical energy would flow directly into his laboratory. As the storm intensified,
shit.
Richmond called his
That's
assistant,
not
an
good.
engraver named Sokolov, to witness the experiment. They entered the study together. The apparatus was already responding to the charged atmosphere, the pointer moving slightly. Richmond stepped closer to take a reading. Without warning, a pale blue sphere materialized near the iron bar. The globe of fire, roughly the size of a fist, hovered for a split second before shooting directly toward Richmond's face. It struck him square in the forehead with tremendous force. The electrical discharge tore through his skull and traveled down through his body. The shock was so powerful that it blasted his left shoe completely open at the sole. Sokolov was thrown backward by the blast, knocked unconscious instantly. When he came to moments later, he found Richmond on the floor. A small red spot marked Richmond's forehead where the sphere had entered. His body lay motionless, smoke still rising from his clothing. There was no pulse, no breathing. The electrical surge had stopped his heart immediately. The iron bar above was twisted and partially melted from the intensity of the discharge. Georg Wilhelm Richmann had become the first person ever recorded to die while conducting electrical experiments. The ball lightning had traveled from sky to rod to bar directly into his brain in less than a second. Strangled by invention.
Damn.
Thomas Migley Jr. was an American chemist responsible for creating leaded gasoline and chlorofluorocarbons.
Dude, hold up. I want to pull this shit up real quick. Let me, dim ball lightning. This shit, yo. I'm, it's a ball of lightning and shit, and it just like floats, bro. It's so fucking cool looking, and it sounds like that's what hit him, bro. Because they're talking about
From sky to rod to bar directly into his brain in less than a second. Strangled by
I don't
invention.
know.
Thomas Migley Jr. was an
Strangled by
American
invention, bro.
chemist responsible for creating leaded gasoline and chlorofluorocarbons. In 1940, at the age of 51, he contracted gasoline and chlorofluorocarbons. In 1940, at the age of 51, he contracted polio. The disease left him severely disabled, unable to move his legs, and with limited use of his arms. He became confined to bed in his home in Worthington, Ohio. Midgley refused to accept helplessness. An inventor by nature, he designed an elaborate system to restore some independence. He constructed a network of ropes and pulleys attached to his bed frame and the ceiling above. The contraption was meant to lift him from a lying position to sitting, allowing him to move without assistance from nurses or family members. The system was complex, with multiple lines running through fixed points. By pulling certain ropes in sequence, he could hoist himself upward. He used the device daily, growing comfortable with its operation. On the morning of November 2nd, 1944, he was alone in his bedroom. He began the routine of lifting himself up. Something went wrong. The ropes twisted as they passed through the pulleys. Instead of lifting him smoothly, the lines began to wrap around his neck and torso. He tried to reverse the motion, but the mechanical advantage that made the system useful now worked against him. The ropes tightened. He pulled harder, attempting to free himself, but each movement only cinched the cords tighter around his throat. He could not reach the release points. His weakened arms lacked the strength to tear through the lines. The pressure on his neck increased, cutting off his airway. He struggled, but the polio had taken too much of his physical power. The ropes constricted further. His breathing stopped. There was no one nearby to hear or help. The system he had engineered to give him freedom had become a trap he could not escape. When he was discovered later that morning, Thomas Midgley Jr. was dead, suspended in the tangle of ropes and pulleys. The invention meant to help him had strangled him in his own bed. The self-inflicted...
Alright, yo. I just wanna say this real quick, right? So them talking about like an invention in like him making an invention in his bed to try and like make him sit up and shit just had me thinking, bro. I remember when I was like 3 or 4 years old, bro. I tried to make a wingsuit, right? I don't know if you know what that is, but a wingsuit, one of these fucking things, right? I tried to make one of these out of a blanket on my top bunk, right? And I tied it around my ankles and I tied it around my wrists And then I jumped off the fucking top bunk and just spread out. And it did not fucking work. I just flat down, bam, smack my fucking face on the ground, bro. That shit hurt. I don't know how I didn't like fuck myself up, but yeah, don't try and make a wingsuit when you're like 3 or 4 years old out of a fucking
tangle
blanket.
of ropes and
It
pulleys.
does
The
not
invention
work.
meant to help him had strangled him in his own bed. The self-inflicted plague. In 1900, American physician Jesse Laziar was stationed in Cuba as part of the U.S. Army Yellow Fever Commission. The 34-year-old doctor believed mosquitoes transmitted the disease, but he needed proof. On September 13th, Lazier made a deliberate choice. He allowed an infected mosquito to bite him. The insect fed on his arm for several seconds before he brushed it away. The bite left a small red mark on his skin. Lazier recorded the event in his notes and continued his work at Camp Columbia. He felt fine. Days passed normally. On September 18th, 5 days after the bite, Lazier developed a headache. By evening, his temperature had spiked to 102 degrees. He knew immediately what was happening. The incubation period matched yellow fever exactly. He had succeeded in infecting himself. The fever climbed higher through the night. His muscles ached with increasing intensity. On the second day, his eyes and skin began to turn yellow as his liver started to fail. Jaundice spread across his body. He vomited repeatedly, his stomach rejecting everything. By the third day, the vomiting changed. What came up was no longer clear. It was dark, almost black. The hemorrhaging had begun inside his stomach. This was the signature symptom. The black vomit that gave yellow fever its terrifying reputation. Blood was filling his digestive system.
About to say, why is it called yellow fever if you're vomiting black? Because it just said signature. No, it's called yellow fever because your eyes and your skin turn yellow.
His kidneys began shutting down. His skin
Because
became
your
slick
kidneys
with
shutting
sweat
down.
as his
Same shit happens when you just go into kidney failure due to alcoholism or other reasons.
body temperature fluctuated wildly. Delirium
Crazy
set in.
shit.
He
All right,
drifted
thanks.
in and
I
out
might
of
be wrong
consciousness,
about that.
his brain swelling from
I
the
might be
infection.
wrong
The
about
virus
that.
was attacking every
Feel
major
free to
organ
fact check me,
simultaneously.
but-
Medical staff tried to keep him comfortable, but there was no treatment for yellow fever. They could only watch as the disease ran its course. His breathing became labored. His heart struggled to maintain rhythm. Internal bleeding continued, his body unable to clot properly. On September 25th, 7 days after the first symptoms appeared, Jesse Laziar died at Camp Columbia.
Bro,
His
I hate
deliberate
how cold it is,
self-infection
bro.
had
When it's
provided the
cold,
definitive
dude,
proof
it
that
makes me,
mosquitoes
like,
carry
yawn
yellow
so
fever.
much more.
The bite he had chosen to receive had killed him exactly as he knew it would. The explosive synthesis.
The
Vera
explosive synthesis.
Yevstafyevna Popova was one of Russia's first female chemists. On May 8, 1896, the 20-Yevna Popova was one of Russia's first female chemists. On May 8,
I'm not even gonna
1896, the
attempt to read
28-year-old
that
was
word
working alone
and
in her
try and
laboratory
pronounce
at
it. I
Izhevsky
was going
Zavod.
to.
She was attempting to
No,
synthesize
take it back. I'm not
methylidinophosphate, a
gonna.
compound with the chemical formula HCP. It was cutting-edge research. Synthesize
What?
methylidinophosphate, a compound with the chemical formula HCP. It was cutting-edge research. No one had successfully isolated this molecule before. Popova understood the risks. Methylidinophosphane was predicted to be extremely unstable. The compound was pyrophoric, meaning it would ignite spontaneously when exposed to air. Even trace amounts of oxygen could trigger a violent reaction. She worked carefully, using sealed glassware and an inert atmosphere to prevent any contact with air. The synthesis required precise control of temperature and pressure. She monitored each step, adding reagents slowly, watching for any sign of instability. The compound was forming inside the sealed flask. Everything appeared controlled. She prepared to isolate the product. Then something went wrong. A seal failed, or a trace of oxygen entered the system. In a
Just blow
fraction
her
of a
up, yo.
second, the
Just
methylidinophosphane
kaboom.
contacted
You know what I'm
air.
saying?
The explosion was instantaneous and massive. The chemical detonated
Massive.
with enough force to
Like
shatter
the low taper fade? No, I'm just
for
playing. That
every
shit ain't
piece
even
of
funny
glassware
no
in the
more.
laboratory. The blast wave threw equipment across the room. Shards of glass became projectiles, flying in every direction. The concussive force slammed Popova backward. The explosion had torn through her body. Glass fragments embedded in her skin. The chemical fire spread rapidly, igniting other materials in the lab. Smoke filled the room. Other researchers heard the blast and rushed toward her laboratory, but the fire blocked the entrance. By the time they broke through, the flames had consumed most of the work workspace. They found Popova collapsed among the wreckage. The injuries from the blast were severe. Shrapnel had penetrated her chest and abdomen. Burns covered her arms and face where the initial fireball had reached her. She died from the combination of trauma and burns. The synthesis she had been attempting had succeeded for only a moment before the unstable molecule destroyed itself and everything around it. Vera Popova became one of the first women to die in the pursuit of chemical research. The radioactive cocktail. Eben Byers was a wealthy American industrialist and amateur golf
Radioactive
champion.
cocktail.
In 1927, he injured his arm falling from a train berth. His doctor recommended a new patent medicine called Radithor to speed his recovery. The product was marketed as a scientific miracle cure, claiming to restore vitality and energy. Each bottle contained radium dissolved in water. Byers tried it and felt invigorated. He became convinced Radithor was responsible for his improved health. He began drinking it regularly, eventually consuming up to 3 bottles every day. He sent cases to friends, business associates, and even his horses. For nearly 4 years, he drank radium voluntarily, believing it was making him stronger. The radium was accumulating in his skeleton. The radioactive element behaved chemically like calcium, so his body deposited it directly into his bones. There, it emitted radiation constantly, destroying surrounding tissue cell by cell. Byers felt nothing wrong until 1931. His teeth began falling out without warning. Painful abscesses formed along his jaw. He lost weight rapidly, his face becoming gaunt and hollow. Doctors examined him and discovered his jawbone was literally disintegrating. The radiation had turned his skeleton into a crumbling structure. Surgeons removed his entire lower jaw in sections, trying to stop the spread of necrosis. Holes appeared in his skull where the bone had simply dissolved away. He could no longer speak clearly or eat solid food. The pain was constant and severe. His body continued deteriorating. The
looks like he's got a big ass smile. He looks like Pac-Man.
Food. The pain was constant and severe. His body continued deteriorating. The radiation had spread throughout his skeletal system, causing fractures and decay in every major bone. He lost more than 50 pounds. Brain abscesses formed as the radiation damaged the bone protecting his skull. He became bedridden, unable to move without assistance. By March 1932, his body was failing completely. The radium he had consumed so enthusiastically had transformed his bones into radioactive dust. On March 31st, in Manhattan, New York, Eben Byers died from radiation poisoning. An autopsy showed his body contained dangerous levels of radium. He was buried in a lead-lined coffin to contain the radiation still emanating from his remains. The man who buried in a lead-lined coffin to contain the radiation still emanating from his remains. The man who watched a volcano. David A. John.
Oh, bro, that reminds me. There was this one video I seen on TikTok of this guy. I think he was at like the Mount St. Helens eruption. No, wait, yeah, that might have been it. I don't fucking know, but he got caught in like the ash cloud and the ash storm and all that shit, and he walked his way out and has a lot of it on video and survived, bro. It was really fucking cool looking.
Johnston was a 30-year-old volcanologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. On the morning of May 18th, 1980, he was stationed at an observation post 6 miles north of Mount St. Helens in Washington State.
Oh shit. It might actually be this.
The volcano had been showing signs of activity for weeks, but Johnston's position was considered safe. He had spent the night recording data and watching the mountain. At 8:32 a.m., the north face of Mount St. Helens began to collapse. An earthquake had triggered a massive landslide, removing the entire side of the volcano in seconds. This released the pressure that had been building inside the mountain for months. Johnston saw it happening. He grabbed his radio and transmitted to the Vancouver office. Vancouver, this is it! Those were his last words. The lateral blast erupted horizontally from the exposed magma chamber. It was not a vertical explosion like most volcanic eruptions. Instead, a wall of superheated gas, ash, and rock shot sideways across the landscape, at speeds exceeding 600 miles per hour. The temperature inside the blast exceeded 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. The pyroclastic flow moved faster than the speed of sound. Johnston had no time to react, no possibility of escape. The observation post, a reinforced trailer bolted to the ground, offered no protection against forces of this magnitude. The blast wave hit with the force of a nuclear explosion. Everything in its path was instantly obliterated. Trees were stripped of bark and branches, reduced to bare poles or snapped completely. The ground was scoured down to bedrock. The heat vaporized organic material instantly. Johnston's body was subjected to temperatures that turned flesh and bone into ash in a fraction of a second. There was no burning, no gradual destruction. He simply ceased to exist as a physical form. When rescued,
well, on the bright side, he definitely felt it for a moment, but probably not long enough that he could even recognize.
Teams reached the area days later. They found nothing. No trailer, no equipment, no remains.
Or maybe he didn't die. Maybe he got away and he's just like, well, yeah, fuck this. I'm gonna disappear forever.
Entire ridge had been swept
'Cause, I
clean.
mean,
David Johnston had been erased from existence by the volcanic blast he had dedicated his life to studying.
I mean,
If you
I
want to
doubt
see
it,
more
but
videos like
he's
this,
probably
click the
dead,
video on
but
screen
GG's,
now
I
and make
guess.
sure to subscribe.